So we're broadcasting now.
We're live.
Yeah. So I need to go back to that thing to see how I'll be able to share it. Okay. So we have two attendees already. We have Fatu Mokoro and Tabras Adrudin. Guys, I know you can hear me. You're welcome. I would appreciate if you can just let us know who you are in the chat box, and then yeah, we could take it from there. I think I would have to put in some information in the chat box as well, so just for people who are just coming in can do the same. Okay, so let me see. So Tabras, okay. Okay, great. Okay. Okay, so I think I have that there. Hopefully people will come in after now. We'll be able to know how to go about it. Okay, you know what? I'm going to allow Tabra to talk and Fatu as well. So I'm going to allow you to talk, Tabra. So let's have you now while we wait for the other guys. Hi, Tabras. Okay, I'm not sure he's ready. How about you, Fatu? Were you able to talk?
Hello.
Hi, good afternoon, Fatu. How are you doing?
Good, thank you.
How is it going there? You're still on lockdown?
Yeah, somehow.
Yeah, nice to have
Thanks
you
for
here.
asking.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm just gonna have each person who is in to talk while we wait for others
Sure.
to come in.
Okay. Thanks for making this happen.
Yeah, you're welcome. Hi, Ibrahima. If you can speak, please. Hello. Okay.
Hi, how are you?
Yeah, good. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing good. How about yourself?
Yeah, well, we're doing good. We're on lockdown, but the good thing is I've been busy. I mean, to get all these activities going with Supply Jobs Canada. So yeah, that's a good side of it.
That's really good. Thanks for doing that.
Okay. Okay, you know what? If you all hear me, I think we have you guys in now. Quite some numbers. I think about 7. If you could just talk about yourself, your name, where you're calling from, hopefully where you work. And we'll start now. You're welcome to the supply chain risk management webinar and post-COVID-19 response. That is from the Supply Jobs Canada group, which is managed by Sierra Projects. So we have our guest, our presenter, Adebayo Adeleke, who is also a Supply Jobs Canada, I would say, founding member. I think you can earn that right now because I know Adeleke has been in the group really for some time now. I mean, I believe it's more than 3 years, if not 5 years, that he has been on the Supply Jobs Group platform, and he's always been contributing. So we really appreciate that. But before I go on to introduce Adebayo, I would also like to talk about Sierra Project. Sierra Projects is a startup. I'm sure some of you already know what we're trying to do. Sierra Projects is actually a supply value chain of training, resources, project and expertise, project expertise resources. Some of the things that we're doing currently has to do with providing business process outsourcing, specifically in the area of supply chain and procurement. But beyond that, also we are providing a strong support to supply professionals and project management professionals in Canada, specifically those who have experience from outside Canada and they are looking to get back to their career here in Canada. And how does that work? We provide a platform where we're able to share information, where we're able to provide, information about trends, job search opportunity, even some support in terms of training, in terms of, networking opportunities, as a matter of fact, mentoring, all of these things just to empower the supply chain professionals. And as part of that on this platform, we bring in experts, if I may correct myself, who have specific specialization. And each time that we bring people into the Supply Jobs Canada, we make sure that they also have some specialization, some specific skills that they are also able to share with the rest of the group. So like a kind of an ecosystem is what I would call it, where we are basically empowering each other. So that's what Supply Jobs Canada really is. So for today, we are looking at the COVID-19 risk event, a major pandemic is the name that is being classified as. It has happened before. I was looking at the history of pandemic, and I could really for the first time see that, this thing is not even happening for the first time. It appears that there has been 4 different type of things like this, either pandemic or there's another name for that, I can't remember now, but these things have been happening before, not the first time. So, but what is special about this particular incident is it impacted the supply chain especially for critical materials that could have even helped in the recovery process. As you may have seen in your news, for the past 2 months now, there's always been this news about the shortage of masks, of different type of materials that the medical practitioners were helping people who are infected with this virus are now struggling to get this material, to the extent that at some point, Canada was actually begging people who have these materials with them at home, probably people who are hoarding it. But, that is the background to all of this. But as a supply chain professional and network, we feel that responsibility to actually engage in a discussion to really review these events. I know sometimes the way it looks as if we don't know what we are doing. I'm a supply chain professional myself, and I know it's a lot of pressure on everyone that is a supply chain professional that is active. So to that extent, we actually help with information about sources of these scarce materials. But just beyond that, are we we have an opportunity here, because risk has two sides to it. There's the risk, the negative risk, and there's the positive side of it. So that is the way we want to look at this, that there are some positive side of this thing, and we also want to explore those perspectives. What I will do also actually encourage us to do as on this webinar is we would like to open it up to you guys, maybe after 30 minutes of presentation by Adebayo Adeleke, so that you guys could actually, let us into your own perspectives of all of these things. You are the front line. You are the ones who are actually dealing on day-to-day basis with these issues. Let us see what is going on. Let's see if this is an opportunity for us to brainstorm, to actually see if there are ways to address this, even proactively going forward for any other future event like this. They're going to happen. It may not be a pandemic next time, but definitely this is a new normal for supply chain professionals. Now we would have to be dealing with these uncertainties. So it's better we start looking at how we're going to be addressing them going forward. So without much ado, I would like to introduce you to Adebayo Adeleke, a supply chain professional, a founding member of Supply Jobs Canada, actually, who is going to be presenting to us today the supply chain risk management, to explore with us all of these things that I've said already. Over to you, Adebayo.
Good evening, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me. It's always wonderful when always invited to talk about what you're passionate about. And when it comes to supply chain risk management, I am passionate about it, and due to several reasons, but which I'm going to explain down the line. But I'm really glad that we can all make it. I know we've had a lot of us I've had long days. If you've been working from home, you understand what it means that remote working is actually longer than working from ideal brick and mortar work. So I think I've tested that fact, and and I can attest to it now that it's hard working from home. So with that, I'm just going to go to the slide that I have today. I'm going to share my screen here a little bit. Cannot share the screen while the other participant is sharing. If you can go ahead.
Maybe I should drop the sharing I'm doing here so that you'll be able to share.
Yes,
okay?
and I'll be able to share my screen there. I just I came up with some talking points, and the way this conversation is going to go, and I want it to be more interactive, as possible as well. We had some polls about some of the things I've talked about in the past. If you have attended my seminar before, or webinar before, I'm quite passionate about how we define supply chain, and you're gonna see that reminiscing again in my presentation. So I will. So this is my presentation today. There's a supply chain risk management and post-COVID response. So COVID presented us as a beaming light over what we've neglected in supply chain over decades. Since globalization started, about the last 30 years, we've been kind of just modeling up, from my perspective, what supply chain truly is supposed to be. And we've been kind of patching it up. And oftentimes we have humanitarian crises that kind of, illuminate some of these issues, but we always find a way to patch it up. But this particular pandemic, there's no room, there's no hiding place for us, there's no wiggle room for us. And it kind of shines some very interesting illumination on some of the ugly part we don't want the world to see. So if you ask anyone from China, from any part of the world, even a kid in a third world country knows one thing or the other about selling masks or PPE. Everyone seems to be a supply chain expert, which is quite interesting. There's a good part, there's a good of it, and there's a bad of it as well, because every time you speak, people will think they understand or they know what supply chain is. So I brought some talking points where we're going to go about how do we define our supply chain. How we define our supply chain determines how we define supply chain risk management going forward. I'll talk about our value as supply chain managers. What is your supply chain risk culture within the organization? and of course, what is risk as it pertains to supply chain, and then difference between linear chain supply network and hybrid supply chain, and then we'll talk about risk mitigation strategy, and then we'll have open for discussion. This is who I am. I'm a U.S. veteran of several wars. I learned my risk and managing supply from the United States Army, and has been spent 20 years in the force before I got out, and I found out that the way we manage risk is completely different from what the world calls risk management as it pertains to supply chain. And I see a lot of inefficiencies, and I see a lot of ways it can be improved by kind of commingling certain concepts together, which I will share with you over the course of time. That's why I'm quite passionate about this, and I'm doing a lot of breaking into research work on supply chain risk management and doing more explorative work. So how we define supply chain management determines how we define our risk management going forward. Now, I was sharing yesterday with Mr. Biodun as we were doing rehearsal for this, is the fact that the way we view supply chain has been quite interesting. The old supply chain concept, the supply chain concept is a linear logic, and everything we've done about that, we've never changed that linear logic. We've always built around it. So since then, we've always have this linear logic of supply chain and linear logic of risk management. That's how we view it. But when the world started changing about 30 years ago, a lot of information driven, the rise of ERP and all those kind of things, we never actually changed it as we move into information era. Now we're moving into Industry 4.0, whereby everything is based on data, big data that goes into automation. But yet we never actually addressed this. We kept continue to just, kind of massage it. But there is no way we can move or change supply chain from linear logic and also change the risk management perspective as well. Supply chain is one entity, risk management is another entity. So both of them coming together have to be properly aligned. You cannot have one in the network world and the other one in the linear world, or one in the linear world, the other in the network world. So that is how I see things that how things unfolded. A lot of issues that we're having this COVID is the fact of the matter is that things are not just aligned. We are always having risk management from a linear perspective, and then we'll have a network supply chain. There's no way those things can actually work. And so the way we define our supply chain, our organization, will determine the kind of risk management they will kind of go to it. So I don't know, like I said, I want this. You guys are all professionals. There's no sense of me lecturing about, supply chain risk management. But what I want us to do is to kind of look at it from a different perspective, kind of provoke some interesting thoughts. Maybe we can look at risk management from a different perspective. Imagine if our risk management is network or diverse, or let me put it this way, more diverse or network-based risk management. Maybe the way we manage our supply chain will be quite different, or maybe the way we look at risk will be quite different. So, but some of these things might be looking like, what is the guy talking about, until we get to different type of supply chain. But the way we define our supply chain is kind of dependent on the way we look at our risk. So our risk, the way we look at our risk and the way we look at supply chain has to be in the same wavelength. We cannot have one in the linear thinking and the other one in the network thinking. We cannot have the one in the linear thinking, the other one in the hybrid thinking. No, it doesn't work that way. And the fact that both of them cannot see eye to eye is what is going on this way. And I always mention this, we have people just happen to Canada, not to use Canada as a whooping dog, but if few planes were flown out of Canada to China and they came back empty, and I still cannot for the life of me understand why Canadians send planes over there. Probably only Canada. I mean, Canada was just the only one that reported it. Maybe a lot of countries, actually the same thing happened to them. How do we even get to this particular junction whereby we have broken supply chain in the whole process? So now, hopefully that's giving you some kind of how this thing is going to go forward. So now our value of supply chain management is both COVID responses. So this is where the whole premise of why we are here today is that what is supply chain going to look like after COVID-19. It's a fact of the matter is now that everybody now knows that the supply chain of the world is jacked up. So more light is going to shine on it. Not necessarily be, okay, when is that, so that we can prevent the next pandemic, but to make sure that our supply chain, whatever it is, either linear, logic, or hybrid, is wire tight. And that cannot happen without us kind of tightening the screws on what we managed as risk within supply chain premise. So, and a lot is that as time goes on, our job as supply chain is going to change over time. I believe in the next 5 to 10 years, the word supply chain manager is going to be more reevaluated and go into the fact of people start looking at us as value chain managers, because what we're going to be providing organization is not about, it's going to span beyond what we can provide as dollar, that, you know, cost optimization, a dollar and cent or whatnot. It's going to be how much value we can provide an organization. And if we look at risk from a value perspective rather than cost perspective, I think life is going to be better. And that's one of the reasons why we have issues across the globe, because everything is all about cost optimization. Everything, so even all these black markets, people selling masks and PPE, is all about money. But if we look at the value proposition as part of the baseline as which we operate as with risk, and look at the network of supply chain and what it has become, I think we can get some great alignment and we can actually sync this and make it work. So as we look at ourselves as managers, we are not, our job after COVID-19 is way beyond managing supply chain up and downstream. Is about how do we provide value to organization, because now we have to look at how do we provide asset, what kind of suppliers, the supplier development, procurement. I mean, you'll be surprised that a lot of things going to be bundled upon you that you don't even have no scope of it before, because now a lot will be required of you to bring value to the table. So that's what I see. I mean, I've seen a lot of things happening, all right, from a lot of webinars that I've been to. Supply chain managers are now expected to know everything, to be able to provide value in such a way and in such a manner that has never been done before in the history of the profession. So now I move on to what is risk as it pertains to supply chain. So as I spoke earlier about the way we view risk has to be the same as the way we view our supply chain now. Risk as it pertains to supply chain, as Mr. Abiodun said earlier, is that risk has to have the two phases of it. You know, there's the opportunity side of it and there is this parasite side of it. But we've always seen risk as parasite. I think the society and the way things are shaped up, we always look at risk as being parasite. But down this presentation, we're going to look at different opportunities that are therein. As in the process of doing risk management, we can see a lot of opportunities that can just pop up and we can explore that can bring more value to the organization. But as it stands right now, we're going to explore this risk parasite from it and how it pertains to it. Now, risk is a parasite that resides in every process. It's not only supply chain, every business process, every process there is on earth, there is risk involved in it. But why is the supply chain risk so important, and why is it so that if it is not properly taken care of, we have issues with it? So came with this idea. I mean, this actually boils down from a lot of research work that has been done on the military side. As risk is a function of the threat, the vulnerability, and the consequences. And that's what that's the linear form of looking at risk. And this is the classic form of looking at risk, is threat, vulnerability, and consequence, the function of all of them acting together. And ability to kind of decipher risk has to fall within those three parameters. And if we cannot do that, then we are misaligning our risk, the way we define risk with the rest of the world. Now, if we are operating on a linear logic, this will fit perfectly. But now that the supply chain has been morphed to something else, this particular definition doesn't necessarily feel what logic is all about. I think and some of the things I do is that the way the supply chain is moving as a value-driven concept, the risk is going to be seen as uncertainty and exposed to uncertainty. Those are the two entities, from my perspective, that was going to be seen through risk in a parasitic kind of form. That risk is either uncertainty or exposed to uncertainty, and that is how you view risk. Whatever is uncertain, risk is present. Whenever you're exposed to uncertainty, risk is present, and that's pretty much it. Because everything else after that is really getting more complicated. But looking at it, the function of threat and vulnerability and consequence, those are linear, and it's still applicable in this world, because our network supply chain is based on also on the linear logic, and all these things can actually be interwoven if we actually take time to look at it. So if we still continue to look at risk from threat, vulnerability, and consequences, it's fine, but we have to evolve to see it as anything that breeds uncertainty or some kind of eventuality that you cannot predict, or you never actually have any scope of it, then that the risk is therein, or anything that can expose your task, your process to anything of any level of uncertainty is risk. So if we look at it that way, and as we've kind of ventured into embracing globalization and the world of uncertainty, as we know, the more our supply chain embraces globalization, the more uncertainty we have. So as we continue to embrace globalization, our risk propensity is extremely high. Now brings me to, what is your supply chain risk culture? What we've seen over at least 15 companies that have dealt with since the onset of COVID-19 is the fact of the matter is a lot of supply chains out there do not have a risk appetite, or risk culture rather. Most times when you go to different organizations, people are like, so who is in charge of this? People are like, that's not my lane. Who is in charge of this? That is not my lane. Who is in charge of making risk decisions? Oh, I don't know. It's not me. That's what I know. I'm not going to pay for this. I'm not going to be responsible for this. That kind of negative attitude towards risk as what has kind of plagued a lot of supply chains. And as time goes on, as post-COVID happens, most of these things has to be raised for us to have full grasp of our risk management within our supply chain. We have to establish a risk culture, and this has to be blessed off by the management. The management has to set the tone of kind of risk appetite, risk consciousness within the organization. Risk, I mean, from my perspective and the way I grew up, everybody is a risk manager. If in a supply chain, everybody from the guy that drives the forklift all the way to the CPO within the supply chain spectrum, all of them are risk managers. Though whoever makes the risk decision differs, but everyone within that spectrum has the right to make like something risky is going on over here. I need to report it if the person cannot make that decision. But we have to look into our organization. Have we looked into our organization and find out what kind of risk culture is therein? Are we actually embracing risk, or are we actually dissecting risk? How are we encouraging people to be able to face risk and encourage the ability to report risk as well? Because this is where everything is going on about, our risk propensity. How do we welcome risk, or how do we antagonize risk? A lot of organizations that I was sharing this Abiodun as well, that a lot of this thing that we've seen in the past is the fact that a lot of people can actually foresee these risks, kind of pivot in a way, embrace it, prepare for it, mitigate it, and that's why they've been able to succeed. But in an event whereby you don't even welcome anything that is of negative, or you don't even do risk rehearsals, or you don't even encourage people to speak about something risky, then how in the world are you expected to manage risk within your supply chain? And these are the things that is going to be expected of us after COVID-19, because a lot of managers are going to be pivoted. Of course, a lot of people have predicted that, our sources of supply is going to move primarily from all our, different tiers of suppliers are going to move away from China. But looking at some of the stats I saw yesterday is the fact that, at least in America, a lot of these guys they're not even thinking of moving their supply chain away from China first. They're talking about cost optimization, which tells you that this particular event of pandemic hasn't changed much. But one of the things that's going to change is how much risk affects dollars and cents. And we cannot actually articulate that unless we address what is our risk culture. Now, I'll further go on into difference between linear supply chain, network supply chain, and hybrid supply chain. This is where I go off a little bit, and you can chime in as you say. This is where every one of us grew up in supply chain management. If you ever studied done any certification in supply chain, this is where everything is based on. The current curriculum or every supply chain body of knowledge is based on linear supply chain. This started since the fall of since the end of World War II, when everyone's talk about this supply chain and how it's so awesome, how supply chain actually helped to defeat Nazi army in World War II, and how it actually helped during the fight in the Pacific as well. So this has been the bread and butter of it, and this is what we've all talked about, whereby we can there's no universality of supply chain. Everything is within the confines of a country. You can see the beginning from the end. You can see the end from the beginning. This is linear. Everything is linear shape. Demand is driven. Raw materials, logistics, manufacturer, distributor, retailer, back to consumer and whatnot. This is the basic form linear that we all grew up with. And everything else, demand forecasting and every other thing that all these other new jazz that came out of it was catered towards these rigs, the supply chain. But about 30 years ago, then people started shifting. We really don't need to, we need cheaper stuff. And most of these advanced economies are now tending towards service economy. So there's no need of manufacturing. They move manufacturing to Southeast Asia. And with that, you've kind of stretched the supply chain from what is nationally known to be more globalized. And in the process, there's so much other actors, other stakeholders therein. And more importantly, normally, the general rule of thumb is the longer your supply chain is, the more risk it becomes and the more expensive it is. But this particular one presents a different method. Like, look, we can, even as long as across the globe in China, you can still get it cheaper. And that's what makes it more attractive for a lot of manufacturing companies, including the giants, Fortune 500. They all went over there to make money, and which they did. But now it becomes an issue. Our supply chain has morphed. People, small mom and pop stores cannot really actually operate within the confines of what is linear. So everyone is now kind of have something we call hybrid. You don't have the full potential to have a full-blown network supply chain, then you have something of hybrid. A little bit of linear, a little bit of network supply chain. Now, what is network supply chain? Network supply chain is what was birthed when we started stretching our supply chain across the world. When we started having different kind of stuff from supply chain visibility, supply chain risk management, supply chain resiliency. We're talking about all kind of stuff going on over there, data driven. Now, the same network is being called now, a lot of people actually do refer to it as digital supply chain, where everything is all digitalized. Before, ERP is actually the bridge between the linear and now digital. Now, ERP is becoming an old legacy platform as well. Now, everybody is now moving into different cloud system. Everybody has their own independent stuff. There's no need of so much backbone again. Not too many of the backbone is needed to actually actualize an enterprise no more. So there's all kind of craziness is going on. Depending whatever works for your organization, everybody jumps on it and make it work. So the issue of the network supply chain, which I have some graphical depiction over here, is that everything is all, it's more or less of an ecosystem. You have everybody working interconnected. Before, in the linear supply chain, I can't really access my consumer. The consumer data is given to the distributor or the retailer. But now, a supplier can actually go directly to the consumer and get the data that is needed, because everything is all interconnected with all these advanced technologies. We have artificial intelligence we have blockchains, we have Internet of Things, and all these other new wave of technology, RFID. They've made data accessibility. Everyone is pretty much accessible. I don't need to go through all these intermediaries to get all this information that I need. I can go directly to start. And we've seen the giant retailer like Walmart. Immediately you pick an item from Walmart store, immediately registered to the people that are producing it, that one particular item is reduced, as somebody already picked up in their headquarters, and they can actually forecast, replenishment and whatnot. So at this particular point in time, supply chain has been morphed to something different. It's a network supply chain, whereby you have so many actors in there, so many players, so many stakeholders, you have your data guys, you have your cloud service being hosted in Mumbai, you have your engineers working out of Bangladesh, so anything that happens at any given time within your network can actually shut down your network. Very interestingly enough, a hardware in Mumbai might actually disrupt your own network, because that is where your cloud is being hosted. Or something happens to your engineers in Bangladesh, so anything within that realm of the scope of the ecosystem can affect each other. Mr. Abiodun and I talk about the issue of ecosystem and how we can use that biological definition of ecosystem and the way the network supply chain. There's a lot of similarities in there. And if we want to find answers to some of the issues plaguing the network supply chain, we can actually find it from nature. It's very fascinating and quite interesting. That's beyond the scope of this discussion, but we can discuss it offline on this. So now, difference between linear and supply chain. There's a poll that's supposed to be going out. I want you to look at what you what you think of what linear supply chain is and what you talk about network supply chain and what comes to mind. I know one is more dynamic, one is more settled, one is more slower than the other, one is more real time, all of those kind of things. So whatever your experience has been in managing supply chain and what you think the difference is, it will be awesome to see those. And I think the polls has been displayed. You guys can just fill it. It's only 2 questions. What comes to mind? And I can tell you each of them. I mean, linear is very sequential in nature. You can't just go directly. You have to bounce from one to the other. And there's very delayed action, because all these bullwhip, the old bullwhip effect came out of linear thinking. The old bullwhip, the elasticity in demand and supply came out of that linear knowledge. And they're very static in nature because it's not as dynamic as the use of digital, and very centralized because it's one way in, one way out. I can know the beginning from the end and the end from the beginning. Mostly in country, yes, the demand variation and whatnot. And then if you go to the one in supply chain, very dynamic in nature, actually, the process and digital workflows is amazingly fast, very interconnected, very decentralized. Go ahead.
The poll has been launched. So I would like that we all respond to it. Maybe like in a minute. I'll give like 1 minute for everyone to be able to respond. Okay. Just 2 questions, so it wouldn't take your time at all.
Awesome. I really appreciate it. So from what you know and what you have experienced as supply chain managers, just tell us what is the difference between the two. And then we have, of course, I've spoken about the hybrid. Hybrid is just the kind of commingling of both, and it's always very problematic because oftentimes what is linear and what is network is completely different. And to be honest with you, the idea called supply chain is the linear logic, period. It's just the supply chain itself. The name supply chain is very, very linear. But now that we've evolved into more network supply, and I think that's probably the quite appropriate word to be used for it. And this is where the bone of contention of how we view risk and how everything that happens to our supply chain, I believe from my own experience and what I've done in consulting, this is where everything emanates from. The fact of the matter is a lot of supply chain professionals cannot differentiate between the two. The fact of the matter is that they cannot define the two, because it's oftentimes when you inherit a problem within your supply chain is the fact that, okay, what are you, because when you start a position as a supplier, you have to be able to triage your system. Am I network supply chain or am I linear? You need to know from fact, because every other thing will fall in line. If you're linear, fine, continue with the linear, or you can find a way to transition to network. And if you're network, still network. What are they? Because you cannot have linear network and then everything that is supporting you is you cannot have linear network and everything that's supporting you is network. You're going to have linear supply chain rather, and everything that's supporting you is network. So it can be very, very tasking and daunting sometimes, and very frustrating, because oftentimes you see people working 18, 20 hours. Something easily can be, all this can be fixed because there's a clear separation between what is linear and what is network. So now, we'll move on to supply chain risk mitigating strategies. And this is what you've seen these strategies I'm going to go with you, but we got to look at it differently. We have to look at it differently. It's a classic way of assessing risk, not only in supply chain, but everywhere we go. In project management, in any other disciplines, even within a church or a mosque or a synagogue, they always assess risk the same thing. But in the matter of supply chain, depending on what kind of supply chain you run, you have to look at it differently. And the way things are going, most supply chains in the world are now network, because you cannot, even small and pop star, all these small, they're not even getting their supply chain from their local vendors. No, everything is all globalized. Everybody wants something cheaper. So it's safe to say that most of our supply chain should have evolved to network supply these days. So now, one of the mitigating strategies is identifying the risk. And one of the things I talk about is supply chain mapping. I talk about this a lot, and it is I'm telling you, man, this is one of the most kept secret, not only in supply chain, but in supply chain risk management. And if you can get the concept of supply chain risk mapping, or even, let's forget it, let's talk about because risk mapping is different from supply chain mapping in itself. And oftentimes when I go to organizations and I ask for people, okay, where's your supply chain mapping? People that have never managers, CPU, have never mapped their supply chain. Some, even for the lack of better words, some don't even know that it was being supported from China during this COVID-19. It's very interesting. I found out about 3 different companies, very big companies, and they have major products in the US, never knew that some of their suppliers are coming from China. It's quite interesting that if you are the CPO and you don't have a clue where some of those products are coming from to service whatever you're doing in your organization, it makes you wonder, like, what else do you know? So supply chain risk mapping, or supply chain mapping itself, it gives you an overlay of everything within your supply chain. Who is working where, who is supporting what, different routes within your supply chain. Though it's as simple as said, it's quite complex and very expensive, very, very expensive, especially when it comes to the risk aspect of it. And some of the things in identifying the risks is that when you do your supply chain mapping, you map everything out, like this, exactly this is where everything that has to do with my supply chain is, who, where, and all, you answered all the 5 W's, everything is out. And then you have to understand the known risks that plague your supply chain. You overlay your own known risk over those mapping. It gives you kind of a clearer picture of what could happen. It gives you your critical path for your critical items, because there are different items that organizations that support different organizations, they're critical items, they're very critical. Critical items are items that, regardless of whatever is happening in your supply chain, you must have these items. If not, your company or your organization is gonna stop. And then you have other items that support it. Those ones they're great to have, but they're not showstoppers. Now, in supply chain risk mapping, you have to understand the main is that your critical item must be protected, and every risk associated with your critical items must be identified and must be mitigated. There's no way in the world you can mitigate every risk within your supply chain. There's no way. I mean, absolutely. It's completely expensive and it's irrelevant. But what you have to do is that you have to look at what are the critical items that if I don't monitor this risk within my supply chain, my whole supply chain is going to crumble. And that's what you have to focus on. You have to be able to identify different risks. And once you do the overlay, which ones are low risk, which ones are medium risk, high risk, and which one are critical high risk. Normally, the high risk one is going to be agitated with your critical items or critical tasks within your supply chain. Now, the very interesting thing Mr. Abiodun and I have been talking about is the use of social network analysis, which is it's been in academia for a while. People have been talking about it, about the social network, and this is even quite interesting. It's a way of actually mapping your supply chain and mapping your risk within your organization, and it's about identifying. Look at the relationships, look at the social relationships within every stakeholders within your organization. And I have an example over here. There's some software that does all this, supplier, buyer, what kind of different connections over there. Now, what social network analysis does is that it helps you kind of identify the framework, what you're looking at, who is connected with who. If anything happens, let's, for example, you have one that is going on in Mumbai, and how can Mumbai that I have nothing going on over there affects my supply chain? That will actually reveal out to you. But most importantly is the fact that you'll be able to identify what are the centers of gravity. Centers of gravity are, if I pull this node, these vulnerability nodes are, what's going to happen to my supply chain? Then you also, I mentioned vulnerability nodes, you're able to articulate where are my single points of failures, where are my vulnerability nodes within my network supply chain. I'll be able to identify it. And more importantly, is also to look at the influencers. Who are the influencers within the social network, and how can they be identified, and how can they be profiting? Now, this is where the opportunities of risk comes in. Oftentimes, when you do this kind of social networking, you see different risks, both on the parasite side and also the opportunity side. Like, wow, this particular stuff, and I was explaining yesterday, let's say you have two, when you do your social analysis, the one you're using, social network analysis, the one you're using is out of China, and they've been very good. But with all this situation going on in China, we have to look at, wow, there's one in Angola. You look at, the framework is bad. They don't have supply chain framework within the organization. But if I actually help them kind of morph and help them with their processes, their product is even better than the one I'm getting in China. And I can actually increase my market share if I can cut this for. So you have to be able to make those kind of analysis, like, this is an opportunity here. And if I can develop this developer, if I can develop this supplier, I might be able to gain or access more market share within my industry. And those are the opportunities that kind of pop out when you do social network analysis. This is just one example of a few. There's algorithms that call it social graphs and all kind of stuff that kind of imitate everything out. You know who is acting with who. It's very, very clear. You know where you cannot mess with, you know where you can actually store with, and how, if anything's going to happen in your supply chain, you can actually anticipate it. Now, we'll go off into, assessing, assess the risks and determine the critical center of gravity and influences. Okay, that's what I just mentioned using the thing over there. Now, develop controls and matrix. This actually we've been discussing with Mr. Abiodun this week about stress testing. When you develop controls and make risk decisions. So as you kind of overlays your network out there, you create different nodes, you know the vulnerability, you got to stress test it. Oftentimes, the most ideal thing is to do what is called just a normal rehearsal, like if this thing happens in real world out of China, how does it affect all different nodes within my network supply chain? But ideally, you cannot simulate pandemic. Ideally, you cannot trigger like, you know what, let me just put COVID, let me just put coronavirus somewhere here and see how this is going to affect my supply chain. Oftentimes, it's not ideal, but what you can do is to simulate it and stress it. Like if this happened, you can kind of do a simulation and modeling. If this happened, if there is a COVID, there's a virus that strike this major supplier within my node, how does it affect my supply chain? How does it, how far reaching can this be? And this is necessary. Oftentimes we come up with all these bright ideas of how to manage risk, how to manage it within our supply chain, but we never tested it out. Reason being fact, we don't have time, or we never actually took time of it now. Once you do your stress testing, a lot of things will come out. It will give you different mitigating, a lot of scenarios going to pop out. And that will help you in kind of develop different controls and different, mitigating risk. Like if this happens, this and this is what we need to do to kind of reduce this risk, not have this residual risk or whatnot. But oftentimes we don't do the stress testing. And we've been having some discussion. There's been a lot of things that have been spoken in different corridors about this stress testing, that if we've been stress testing some of the supply chains we have, because to be honest with you, a lot of the supply chains that we have out there has never gone through this kind of rigorous stress. And a lot of them are broken. Some are still hanging on. Some are like strong, and some are broken. And the reason why is because we never stress test. When you stress test, you know where your vulnerability points are. You correct it, you strengthen it, you retighten it. And then you look at different opportunities and where you can flush ideas to certain areas and where you can help them support those certain areas that are weak. Oftentimes not all the part of the node is going to be extremely strong. Some are weaker than the other. And yours is to make sure that you strengthen those that are weak and then you maintain those that are strong. But this all can be identified during the stress testing. This is quite expensive and very time consuming. But I'll tell you what, the cost that is going to cost your supply chain, if you don't do it, is going to be far greater than what the cost is going to cost you just doing the stress test. And of course, you come up with implementing controls. This is where people, risk is very cyclical in nature and very continuous. We have to continue to monitor them because one is done right now, just like balance. I don't know if you see balance is nothing, it's not something that is constant. Balance is just not like this. Balance is always like this. It's a very continuous process, it's a very continuous movement. You cannot say you have found balance one time and then stick within. No. Balance is a very continuous movement, and you have to continue to maintain that to be able to get balance. The same thing with risk. You have to continue to monitor it, putting the thumbs on the pulse of it to be able to make it more realistic and to make it more alive. And then of course you supervise and you evaluate, you look at different residual risk, what you can use in the nearest future, and what has worked, what hasn't worked, and how you can mitigate it. These are things that is expected of us. As imagine everything else you're doing within your supply chain, and then somebody tell you that you're tasked with developing risk, supply chain risk management within your organization. You'd be like, what is this guy smoking? Because it's a very intensive process, but this is what is expected of us. After COVID-19, every supply chain manager will be asked to be equipped with this kind of knowledge. When you come to work, they'll be expecting you to be able to develop a risk management program within your organization. And when we're talking about developing risk management, these are the things you have to take into consideration. And then that's about it. There's some other stuff that we're going to talk about, question and answer, but these are the things I want us to look into as we address as we go. COVID-19 is pivoting a little bit, depending on what kind of report you believe in, from the government or from the doctors. They're all conflicting ideas, but as it states that some states, usually in the US, are coming out of it, some are not. In different parts of the world, people are lifting the ban as they say it. But at some point in the nearest future, the world is going to go back to the normal or whatever we define as the new norm. And this is what is going to be expected of us. Ability to articulate risk management within your supply chain is going to bring value, enormous value. And I want us to start leaning forward towards it and start making sense of it. I'm working on a very robust supply chain risk management course, and it's almost at the end of it. I think we're going to release it at the end of the month, of next month. And if you're interested in it, register for it. It's going to be mind-blowing. I'm going to have interviews from people that have managed risk differently from their organization and how they've seen risk has changed over the course of time in supply chain over the last 40 years and what they anticipate in the nearest future, and how we as supply chain managers can pivot and be of value to make sure that we're ahead of this risk. Risk, you got to be ahead of it. There's no other way than to be ahead of it. So all these things are one I want you to at least kind of provoke different line of thinking within us, and hope we can come up with viable solution. But I'll let you know when the course is completed, and we can all have it's the learning process for us. I mean, this before we start, we're talking about how can we even get a better product of stress testing, or more importantly, how to map our supply chain in such a way that is quite unique and it brings more value to different organizations. With that, I yield back to you, Mr. Abiodun.
Okay, thanks so much. I mean, this is a lot of information within a very short time that we had. But, I haven't said that. I want to believe that if you are listening in to this live stream, you would have picked one thing or the other. What I would like from you, because this webinar, it's not something that we believe we know all, right? Like, we want a situation where you also can, provide your own perspectives as a professional in the industry. Whatever has happened, COVID-19 situation, I also I've actually gotten some information from a professional I had a webinar with sometimes around February or so, or the first week of March. The professional was actually in the food industry, okay, grains. Canada is into grains a lot. A lot of our export is actually grains, especially in the west, the prairies, from Manitoba all the way to Vancouver, right? So we export a lot of grains to China. And he told me that, look, this is what is happening in China right now. Imagine that type of information is actually an information that is discrete, like an information that is fed into a system. And this type of information is being garnered from every other data, every other node within a supply chain. Apparently, when you have that information, you are able to make some forecast about what is going to happen to your supply chain eventually. It's only a matter of time. Well, eventually, it happened. Within a month. I think I'm talking about, it's probably first week of March. Now today, this is April ending. So I believe within 4 weeks, this happened. That this thing hit Manitoba, and before we know what we're talking about here now, we're in a shutdown, and we're still in a shutdown right now. But my own perspective about this, what I think about is, how come, like, are you telling me that there is no one who actually has gotten this information in advance to be able to make a forecast about how it's going to impact their supply chain? Because it pretty much looks like nobody was prepared for this. Is it possible that nobody had an information at hand that could actually use it to mitigate? This is a ridiculous example. I learned the other day that Canada actually burned like 1 million N95 masks last year, just November last year. How close could that be? I mean, COVID-19 already was happening in China in November. So how could it be that you have that type of information and you take an action that pretty much put people's life at risk, right? Because that's what it is.
Yeah,
so these are the kind of question that I would like us to ask. I mean, they say a problem known is half solved. I would like to really see from your own perspectives, what are those things that you have seen, you know, that you know, raises questions. What are those questions that you have? Would like to really appreciate if you could, you know, post those questions. And you know, this is a mastermind we have here. I believe that all of the guys in this webinar are all supply chain professionals, and you can speak to whatever question that any one of us bring up. So if you can, there's a question and answer tool that you can use, or if you prefer, actually, we actually would prefer that you speak. Like I could give you your remote, I can unmute your microphone so that you can speak, and you know, that really will be appreciated, and everybody would get the question and be able to respond by raising up. There's a tool actually that we use to raise up your hand, and then I'll allow you to speak once I see that. Yeah, that's what I'll do. But now I will show you the poll. I believe only 7 out of 11. I think we had 11 people. Only 7 out of 11 responded. If you haven't responded, I just give you like the next, you know, 1 minute, and I will publish the poll. Okay.
Yeah, I think we have a question here from Remilekun Obadino. How do we implement the controls when most of the product or items comes from China because of price disparity and cheap labor? This is a very contending questions, because you're talking about one of the known risk is what availability of supply, and availability of supply is, I mean, if my knowledge of economics and the part of factors of production has to deal with it, you know, and what advice I've done for a lot of CPOs is the fact that they should task their supply chain managers to do the evaluation. Why will it, what's the cost, and why should I pivot away from China? Though the price disparity is there and cheap labor, but in situations like this, whereby despite the price disparity and cheap labor, you still can't get the material. Getting hold of the item is more important now than the price. So I'll always advise, if China is still going to continue, or depending on the political risk, you know, inherent of China, is fine, but always find alternate source of supply. Because in an event whereby the current issues where we're having right now, that China is actually restricting a lot of shipment outside their country because they don't know what is going to happen in the second or third wave, then and then if anything happened in the second or third wave and the whole country is shut down again, there goes your items that feed into your manufacturing of the items. So I will advise, as part of, you know, supply risk mitigating strategy, is to figure out a way to convince your CPO by articulating a dollar and cent. Because oftentimes the CPO doesn't see anything unless it has the dollar value to it, because that's the only thing they understand, the impact of the shareholders. It's the fact that you bring it to them like, look, yes, we can continue to China, but we need to have alternate sources of supply, because in an event, anything happens in China and we cannot defend it, or there's nothing we can do because half of some of these problems or some of these risks are handled at the highest level, at the national level, strategic level, then we have to take matters into our own hands and pivot. And one of the things when you're doing risk management is to always have alternative sources of supply. Though the price is different and whatnot, and it might be changing price for your consumer, that's something you're going to eat up. But if your product is that good, they will understand and they will deal with it, because they rather have it expensive than not to have it at all. So oftentimes a lot of us don't have any alternate source of supply. We just China, and China. You know, and not only China, even Southeast Asia and other countries, we have to have 2 or 3 other sources of supply that we can always activate at any given time. I hope I have answered your question, Remilekun Obadino.
So I'm still waiting on the questions from the guys in the webinar. Well, you need to use a tool to raise your hand, and I can then unmute you so that you can speak, or you can put in your question in the chat box. So while we're waiting on the other guys to ask their question, this is the results for the poll that you know, that we had 8 out of 11 people who have responded.
Can you send it? Is there a way you can send it to me or by email? I can.
Yeah, definitely I will send it. But you can see it right now, right? Like you can see it. Okay.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. So basically, the attributes that most people have identified as the attributes of a linear supply chain is it sequential, and then is it static.
Yeah.
And which apparently, if it is static, then it is not supply chain. Okay. that that is the way I see it. If it's static, then it is not supply chain. I know we had some discussion at some point where we actually said that some of the theories that is being taught in school nowadays in terms of supply chain is pretty much obsolete, right? Yeah, think about Michael Porter's value chain, supply value chain. It is sequential, like it's from this node to this node to this node that way, and then there is not even connected. That's the other thing when you look at that model, so that is what we're still working with. I mean, yeah, we now we know that there's a supply network, the supply chain network, which actually that's a reality of what we're working with today. As you can see, the second question here says it's dynamic. Well, that is a supply chain that I know that I worked in. But unfortunately, like you did say that, Adebayo, earlier, that it appears that there is a conflict between what exists as the operating supply chain model and the tools that we're actually working with in most organizations is based on the linear supply chain model. When you have this type of situation, what you actually have is inefficiencies. And unfortunately, again, okay, saying that again, it appears that some of the key performance indicators that we're working with in supply chain also has to change because look at me, for example, in procurement, depending on the environment where you worked, if you worked in oil and gas, probably the type of key performance indicator might be different. They might not be focused on price or cost savings. They might be focused on maybe risk management, actually, because it's an high risk area. So they might be focused on speed. They need to get things done. They need to get it done now. They are not focused on compliance, apparently. Okay, so it's different for each organization. But the mere fact that if we are working with a linear supply chain model, and then we have some kind of key performance indicators that also sort of aligns with a linear supply chain model, then automatically we have a struggle there, because then we're not working with a dynamic model that could actually do some very proactive optimization, just to use that language, in a situation where you have a supply chain network that is very active and proactive. And my thought process is we have the technology to make that happen. As a matter of fact, I think that there's a technology somewhere that already implements this. Anything that you can imagine, it's done already. Somebody already did it. But in terms of our network, our supply chain professional network, I don't know. I haven't really had any information. Like you guys that are on this webinar, this is one of the reasons why we have our group, the Supply Jobs Canada group. Yeah, maybe you have those type of information. Yeah, please go ahead and share with us. If you know of a tool that actually has been developed and is in use, and you already have access to those type of tools, yeah, go ahead and share the information with us so that we could also have that knowledge and share that information with people in our group that, look, there's a particular tool. But as far as I know, I haven't seen those tools. In terms of the supply chain social graph, yeah, that that is fantastic. Actually, I happen to be working on something like that, but not specifically to address risk management. And that's the beauty of a supply chain social graph, because once you, is an infrastructure, basically, that's what it is. Because once you have that, then it is then scalable to address any issue that you might have in your supply chain, be it a risk issue, be it maybe price sensitivity, or something of that nature. You could pretty much apply it to any objective that you have in your supply chain. So for me, I believe supply chain social graph is very, very critical to solving a lot of this problem, specifically addressing the issue of the dynamic supply chain model that we think we should have right now instead of the linear one. So that's my own thought. But let me see. I think Johnny Lou has a comment here. It may be less difficult to perform stress tests on SC on unknown costs. Okay. Known cost is what he says here. What about unknown and unexpected situations, such as a major war breaks out or financial market collapse?
So there are two questions. Actually, there are three questions there. There's one on question and answer, and there's one from Remileko Obadina and Joe Lu. So I'll just take it one by one. So with Remileko, which asked first, is that for flexibility and technology advancement, I think it's possible to change from linear to network chain within the organization. What is your take? Yes, it is, but it has to have everything that goes on within the organization, including the supply chain framework, has to be sync with what the management is doing. So if the management is still in the archaic era, it's going to be extremely difficult for you to implement. Yes, there are a lot of technologies. It's easier to switch into that network. Yes, it is, but it is expensive as well, and is asked to be something that the management is comfortable doing, and that's the most important thing, because none of this thing is going to be able. It's going to happen if management has not blessed off on it or willing to go that route with them. Maybe they said they just don't see it, and oftentimes, what most supply chain managers do is to kind of beat their head, bang their head against the wall, and to convince the management that this is the next frontier, this is the best way, and this is the next thing to do, and the best thing to do for the organization. Now, talking about Johnny Lou, it may be less difficult to perform stress tests on supply chain unknown cores. What about unknown and unexpected situations such as war breakout on financial crisis and collapse? Now, oftentimes, this I'll put it to you, Johnny Lou. Oftentimes, I completely understand. Yes, it is less difficult to perform stress tests on a known risk. Then unknown risk is hard because you don't know where it's coming from. But another thing that where we as supply chain managers needs to be very proactive about it and very, very intuitive in nature. Unknown cause, that things that we think we don't know, it just happened. But oftentimes, these things actually percolate over time. It's just the symptoms that we see that oh, this just happened. Oftentimes, this has been happening in the background. We just don't see it or put one and two together. For example, I was sharing with him, prior to Donald Trump being elected as the president of the United States, the 42nd president of the United States, he made some very bold campaign statement during his campaign. People are like, this guy is off the rails. He doesn't know exactly what he's talking about. But some companies actually took what he said as a possible outcome, and they actually planned their supply chain just in case this guy got elected. We cannot be found with our pants down. We have to be proactive. And they actually pivoted. So when this issue of China trade war started, they were already there. They've already found different suppliers that apart from China. So when the rest of the world was actually trying to find their bearing, these guys are already gone. To them, the fact of the matter is they've already seen it. They were able to piece all those things together. The same thing with war. I mean, war just doesn't start in a day. It is the background. Ability to actually look at those percolations and, okay, if this thing, worst case scenario, if this thing continues to like this, it's going to be, full all-out war. And what do I need to do? I need to figure out a way that my supply chain is protected. Oftentimes, with supply chain managers, we're not given that much credit, or we're not given that much power to go deeper, to make decisions by looking at finite details of data that are out there and make decisions. Okay, if this thing continues this way, let's look at different scenarios that can come out of it. So to your question, Johnny Lou, some of these things can be mitigated, especially the war and major war and financial markets. Yes, there are a lot of indicators out there that people will put together as like, okay, this is not the last time this thing looks like this, we had a major issue in the financial market. So let's start making the same thing can be done in supply chain. But just let's say that we weren't given the opportunity to put all those numbers together, that we actually go out and, there's nothing actually we can do. But the one thing we can only do during those times is look at the real data. And as the data has started to come in, and we kind of started forming our own intuitive decision and make adjustment as necessary. I hope I've answered those questions. And then there's one here from Ibrahim. How to evaluate resources required to mitigate risk? How much is acceptable? This is all predetermined, Ibrahim, from the get-go. And this all boils down to the risk culture within the organization. What kind of resources and all these things going to be allowed. It's not something that you just make up along the line. As an organization determines to toe the line of risk management within the supply chain, how to evaluate the kind of resources, what kind of resources is going to be allocated to it, and how much is going to be allocated to it, and what is acceptable and what is not. It's going to be all predetermined. So ahead of time, and it's all determined on the market position of the organization and how much aggressive they want to be as well. So all these things feeds into supply chain, and supply chain make the best out of it when assessing those kind of risks. I hope I've answered those questions.
So I guess how to evaluate the resources required.
Yeah, that's what I just answered.
Mitigate risk, and then how much is acceptable. Okay.
Yeah.
So Ibrahim, I hope you got the answer there. You can just confirm by typing in yes, and we'll move on. Hello?
Yes.
Okay. So how do we analyze the stress testing on multiple suppliers? That's from Remileko.
Okay, so analyzing multiple suppliers, different criteria, different supplier development. Depending on the kind of criticality they are involved in. If these guys are handling hazardous material or hazardous items, it's going to be completely different from somebody that has something that has to do with just natural rare metal. So each particular suppliers, and the stress testing, mostly, like I said earlier, is not for all the suppliers. It's only for critical suppliers. And oftentimes, let's say you have about 5,000 items and all come from different suppliers. And only 20 items are critical in there. Those 20 items are the one you're going to be concerned about, because all other items can be substituted for and can be sourced somewhere else. But these other 20 suppliers, they're like very critical to you, and you have to guard them like you're guarding like your last meal, you know? So, and depending on the different parameters. So oftentimes, because if they're similar, then you can actually bundle your supply at one point, but they can be similar. So the way you kind of assess them is differently. And the way each of them is going to react to it is different, depending on which area of the world they are and depending on what kind of social network. Because we're talking about stress testing in a very social environment. You don't even know if some of them in a developing economy, they have different framework from a westernized, well-developed framework. So they're all different parameters, and what your risk appetite for each and every one of them is different. What you're allowing, what I'm gonna allow for a supply out of France is gonna be different from the supply out of Djibouti. Absolutely different.
So that reminds me, just to jump in, and that reminds me of the topic of indexing. Yes. The risk in our supply chains, which is, I think it ties into what you're talking about there, you know, because you have limited resources. You can't chase down every other supplier or every other risk event or probable risk event. You know, that's it. You know, the dynamics of this thing. And you know what? Maybe a probable event last week, might actually be an active one, this week, just as the way we had, this COVID-19 thing. I'm sure it's on some people's radar. There's no way it is not
It has to
on
be,
people's radar.
especially when you have PPE that was normal, all of a sudden the thing starts skyrocketing like weeks and weeks and weeks. And if you look at the way the world is being played in a global economy, if it's already in Wuhan, look at flight pattern from Wuhan to other part of the world. Okay, if it is already in Wuhan, definitely, if we continue to look at the map of, definitely some part of the world is going to get it. It's just a matter of time. And how do we, those things could, like I said, a lot of slow reaction happened. A lot of people just nonchalant attitude happened, and some of them could have been mitigated absolutely, and some of them maybe wouldn't have been absolute as well as. But one we know right now is the fact that the information that we have, we just have to act on it because they're real time.
Okay, so I hope that answered the question. But
so that question from Nekun.
You have another question?
Yes. How do we analyze the stress testing? Oh,
that's the one you just answered now.
Yeah,
so maybe she could confirm if we've answered the question. Definitely, there will be a follow-up to this because, like we know already, supply chain is not going to be normal again. We are already under the radar. I mean, you know what happened in BC. Okay, so BC actually decided to take over the supply chain. I can't remember right now if it's for the food supply chain or the medical supply chain. They intervened basically. So that just tells you that supply chain is now under the radar of the government because they believe that they could have done things better.
Yeah.
Why I'm laughing right there is what happened with Canada, when they flew a plane to China and they came back empty. Okay, so what came to my mind is buyer beware. Okay, because that's the first thing that we learned, in supply chain, that regardless of what promises has been made to you, you just have to make sure that you do your due diligence. I remember our premier in Manitoba saying that, yeah, we were the first, government to place an order for, 20 million or whatever, PPEs and stuff like that, And guess what? I'm just my guess. One of the planes that went out, probably was Manitoba plane. It also came back empty with the federal one. So it's easy to say that we're not doing it right or supply chain doesn't get it. But how easy it is for the government to actually intervene in the supply chain profession, which is basically something that started, well, maybe the traditional supply chain started off with the military and all that, but then the modern supply chain, for me, the model for modern supply chain is Walmart, which is in the private sector. How could a government or a regulator step into that without causing chaos? I'm just telling you to prepare for what is going to happen to supply chain, basically is what I'm saying. The fact that now there's a disruption that is happening to supply chain is what we have to prepare for. Like I said, there's a negative side of it, there is a positive side of it. But maybe this will be a question to you because these are some things I also would like us to take away from this discussion, that we also look at the positive side. So what do you think in terms of the disruption, especially coming from the government side, where Toronto decided to take over the food supply chain? Now, this is another risk. This is regulatory risk we're talking about right here. There is a BC decided to take over the, maybe medical or even the entire supply chain. I didn't follow through with what happened eventually with that. Maybe they saw that, oh, this is too big for them, and they kind of dropped the idea. I don't know, because I haven't heard anything since I saw that in the newspaper. So in terms of regulated risk, how does this pan out? Also, you could also talk about the trade agreement between United States and Canada, how the whole thing, these dynamics, was playing out. Was it further adding to the problem, or is there a way we need to prepare for this? Because this is what I'm saying with supply chain going forward. We're now being sensitive even to different type of risks now after this COVID-19. You would see a situation where we're just paranoid going forward.
Actually, paranoia is all over the world right now.
Okay, so how do we, what do you think about this? How do we as supply chain prepare for this? Maybe in terms of our career development, or maybe in terms of how we navigate supply chain profession going forward.
So now, as you can see, what we call the risk chain. This is where one risk triggers another risk, So one risk now, actually, the saying is no risk actually occurs in a vacuum. There's another risk is going to trigger on the whole process. So this particularly has triggered a lot of political and regulatory risk. And some of them are, is it temporary or permanent? Those are the things. Are they going to take it over permanently or temporary? If it's temporary, it's just something you have to manage for a time being. But if it is permanent, then it changes the whole dynamics of things. You have to kind of restructure your whole supply chain framework, because now something that used to be something that you can manage as a risk is now part of your own framework now. And those are the things that, is this going to be a continued effort by the government? Like, look, if something doesn't go the way they like it, they're going to take it over. And that is what you need to be, because this is the thing, when it comes to the issue of government, it's supposed to be something that you shouldn't be considered as a risk. It's supposed to be like certainty. Risk is something that, like I said earlier, is when you have this high level of uncertainty. So with this birth, the idea of, at any given time, is any of my supply chain is going to be interrupted by the government because they just don't like the way the things that are looking. And those are the things we have to be very cognizant of as the thing happen. And we have to advise, look, at any given time, the government can intervene in interception of anything. And that poses another risk that we have to kind of mitigate and prepare for. I don't know how you kind of, let me put it this way, how one can actually contain those kind of risks. Because governmental risks are they're very strange. Actually, of all the risks out there, political and governmental risks are very, very strange, because until you have a change of government or you have to lobby and all those kind of things, those risks don't usually go away. And they can actually add additional stuff to you, man. If you're a manufacturer, they probably have additional days or weeks. If you're in a project, probably had additional days or weeks, and that's going to affect your time, your cost, and your performance and your schedule. Yeah. All those things. So those are the things, the second and third order effect of some of these risks, and one has to just adjust it. But the thing is always boiled down, is it going to be temporal or is it going to be permanent? That now, with the issue of the China, the NAFTA shredding, NAFTA has always been the bedrock of the North American trade. It's very, very solid, and people, for everything that's going on between all those three countries, people do not need any uncertainty. So when these whole things happened, they created so much havoc with steel prices of rising of steel, movement of goods and services. Like at some point during this whole trade with NAFTA and everything came to question during when Donald Trump intervened in 3M, manufacturing of regulators and movement of food across Canadian borders. All these things are always going to come up. The question is it going to impair? How many days is it going to impair? If it's going to be permanent, then you need to know ahead of time. If it's going to be temporary, that is where the friction point is always, because you never know when temporary is just going to be, off, or it's going to be permanent. So the thing I always advise supply chain managers is the flexibility that comes with it, because most importantly is how you communicate this to your customers and to your suppliers alike, because those are where the risk is going to be highly tense, is at the receiving end of it. You as the middleman, as a supply chain manager, is be able to make sure that, okay, this is how much it's going to affect my upstream and my downstream. How can I manage it in such a way that it's always going to be free flow? Because if those regulations or whatever intervention from the government causes additional money, we need to know ahead of time. We need to know how we're going to spread it. We need to know who's going to be, responsible for what, and all those things is where mostly the friction point is. If government delays this thing extra 2 weeks, who's going to eat up those costs? There's a cost to the driver staying at the border of between Canada and the US for 2 weeks. Who's going to pay for the guy? All those things, there's always a cost to it, and there's always on the superficial side. On the back end as well, there's always a cost to, bringing people to come to manufacture when there's no material on hand because it's being held at the border and all those kind of things. So there's this second and third is about planning. So ahead of it, normally, except for extenuating circumstances like we have, normally government always give timelines, before they intervene. Like these days, where we're going in 2 weeks' time, we're going to start this. That will give time for people to adjust. And that's the great thing about governmental and political risk. They always give you some timeline to adjust, to make your decision. Oftentimes, the rest of the risks are not there. They just happen like that, So that's a great, that's always the silver lining in there. I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, you answered it, but the more you talk about it, the more I also see a lot of things that are going to happen after this COVID-19. Think about it, Japan is trying to move all their, manufacturers out of China. That is going to impact some supply chain here in Canada. I hope somebody is thinking about how that is going to impact their supply chain. So that 6 months down the road or 1 year down the road, somebody is not saying that, oh, I didn't know that's going to happen. Yeah, like you said, when Donald Trump went on his campaign saying that he's going to trash NAFTA. Yeah, some people were already working on that. Okay, how is it going to affect our supply chain? I think in the same manner, we need to be looking at how these responses from all these governments in China pulling out their nationals from China is going to affect the supply chain for sure.
Absolutely, exactly. If that particular supplier is not only supplying the Japanese, or it's only supplying other countries, but now you have 2 or 3 countries already withdrawn. That makes those guys always, manufacturing volumes, but the volume has decreased. So that happens to your unit price of whatever you get out of there as well. So everyone is gonna get out. You can't fight in the mud without getting stained. So it's very, and those are the things. There's no action that, especially the network supply chain, there's no action that is done in vacuum. Once one is done, it's going to affect the other.
It's going to affect the other.
And whatever how this whole thing between the U.S. and this conflict, this Cold War status between the U.S. and China is going to resolve, the rest of the world is going to feel the heat, and they're actually feeling the heat at the moment. So, and we'll continue like that until the new administration happens in June and in November, if there is any new administration, and how that one is going to tackle whatever is already existing between China and the U.S. But let be known that U.S. and China will always be adversary. Forget whatever is going on, whatever they tell the world. But the national security, there are few countries that are on the adversary list of the United States, and China is number one, has always been number one for the last couple of years. So they fight economic warfare. They don't fight military warfare, but they fight economic warfare. So if you have that one at the back of your mind, that regardless whatever is going on, U.S. will always seek their own best interest in China, and that will never sit well with China. So this whole back and forth thing will continue to go for a long time. We have at least one more question here.
Okay. I just were talking about that. I remember the cyber warfare as well.
Okay. Yes, that's another risk in itself. And we also have to take into consideration, as a lot of people are moving because of COVID-19, a lot of the digital economy has expanded. A lot of people are online. Now is a prime time for the cyber warfare. It is, people are getting attacked. Look at Zoom. Everything that's going on in the world, do you think some normal people are out there to be like, you know what, the only thing that is going on for the world, let's just maintain it. But definitely some people actually attack it. So there is nothing that is absolute in this world as we know it. As we continue to unleash and move to digital world, so is a lot of issues with the digital world as well. Data protection, how to protect your data, because now data is going to be how you gain your competitive edge in your industry. And that data is stolen from you. You might as well just pack and close your doors,
And those becomes even newer dimensions of the risk management now, right?
Exactly.
That we need to put into consideration.
ABC inventory control management. ABC inventory control management used in controlling the inventory. Now the COVID-19 occurred. Is it necessary to overstock or stock the critical items to avoid such pandemic, or will it forecasting works with what mitigation process should be in place? Now, this is very interesting. We talk about just-in-time inventory has gone out. So, I mean, we've been using just in time since the onset of the 90s, or, I think it was right after Jack Welch, the old thing with GE and whatnot. Now, nobody actually, even Amazon, except for those guys that are doing, nobody actually carries inventory no more, because the cost of it, inventory holding cost is can be high, especially in the service economy, whereby you have to, the real estate in most of this Western world is high. You know, people to manage the warehouse is high. You pay them what, $17 an hour. I mean, this thing, there's a cost associated with it. So ability to get this thing within a day or two is what most logistic companies are working on. 24 hours delivery, or even within an hour's delivery. Now, I believe in agile supply chain. Our supply chain has to be agile, especially in this kind of conditions. We have to have agile supply chain. And oftentimes, regardless of what is going on in the world, regardless whatever is going on in the world, every one of us will always embrace, less inventory and whatnot. But you always have to have rainy days, just in case anything happens within your supply chain. You always have to have some kind of inventory of critical items to stop gap, whatever is necessary. Now, this has to be blessed over at the strategic level. Is it that how many months is stop gap? 3 months, 6 months, or whatnot? And you build those costs into your supply chain cost, overall cost. Just in time is sweet and great, but if China closes its door one day and say we're not doing anything, you depict all your stuff before you pivot to get another, verify and certify another supplier in another country, look at their processes. It may take time, especially in countries that don't have framework. Then you have to wait for God knows 2-3 months to get something done. You have to get going. Oftentimes, certifying and getting a new supply is not like a flip of switch kind of process. It takes months looking at investigating into there, because there's another part we call brand and reputational risk. If you don't get the right supplier, it affects your brand and reputation, and that will ruin any company, any organization faster than COVID-19. So all these things are it is quite, and this has to be done at the strategic level. And look, if all things happen, if all hell broke loose, are we doing 6 months that we didn't, regardless of what is going on, can we pivot in 6 months and get a new supplier that we are aligned with culturally and processly? Is there a way? Good. And then keep those materials. I'm always an advocate of it. People don't like it. It's a cost, but regardless, you build those costs in as part of your permanent
buffer stock, right?
Buffer stock, exactly. It will work, but some people don't like the idea. They believe the whole world is so seamless and whatnot, but it might not even be China. It might be some strike action in the port of Los Angeles that caused overload. And I mean, there's so much that can happen. I mean, there's a tsunami that can happen. There's nothing that you give no prior warning that can destroy all kind of things, Strait of Malacca in Singapore might shut down due to some earthquake, and then no supply comes out of China. And then what happens? So all these things can happen in any given time. It's always good. Like I'm a proponent of humanitarian supply chain, whereby certain stocks are going to be at a different part of the world, because by the time, nobody has the time to be pivoting. They just go to your warehouse, pick those stuff up, and start your relief system. That's my own. I've always advised my clients that way, because as the only way to kind of mitigate this. So at the beginning, as you start this supply chain journey and risk mitigation, all these things have to be factored in and your organization at the managerial level must be comfortable that this is what we are willing to do. 3 months, 6 months, 4 months, that's it. That's all the stocks we have to produce without losing anything after that we lost, So those kind of things have to be done prior to.
Yeah. I think that like you were talking about risk management strategies, this all has to go into the formulation of the risk management strategy.
Exactly.
The indexing as well, because if you properly index a risk event or even a supplier risk, then there is a potential that you are proactive with whatever risk event happens, either with that supplier or with that material, or with any other node in your supply chain. And this is the reason why, like I said earlier, that the supply network social graph is really is something that we cannot do without. In the reality of the new supply chain model, it's really nothing. It's something we cannot do without, because I could imagine that prior to this time, you know, the way people manage risk is so linear that they are not able to figure out all the permutations, you know, that needs to happen with down to the second, the third tier, even to the last tier of their supply chain. And this is the reality that we're facing currently with the linear supply chain model. And the reason why we're not well prepared for the model of disruption, which is the COVID-19 that happened.
Yes.
Yeah, but it's been interesting so far. Really appreciate your contribution. I'm not sure if we have any question no more at this point. We've actually spent the 90 minutes. We've, you know, topped the 90 minutes for this webinar. Well, I'm looking forward to a follow-up actually to look at the root cause. Okay, because we're talking about COVID-19 right now, but we were saying that is actually the model of our supply chain that is the root cause, you know, and I think it's something we need to look at the design of our supply chain, to look at a different model and actually see how this has contributed to what we are right now, because eventually we're going to have other type of disruptions. At that point, we're not going to be talking about COVID-19 anymore. We'll be like, okay, so what is going on here? We'll still go back to the supply chain model that we're saying is the root cause. So we will need to still do a follow-up with you on the design of the supply chain models and see what we can come up with at that point. But for now, I don't see any questions. Really appreciate the time. I strongly encourage the guys who are online to reach out. Well, maybe if I have a link to your course, I could put it in a follow-up message to those who are in attendance, so that if they are interested in the course, it's something that can enroll into. And we'll see how we could also work together to collaborate on this going forward.
Definitely. And a lot of these are tips and pieces of what is going to be coming up for the course. And I'm really expecting, I think we're going to look at supply chain risk management in a new dimension.
Great, awesome.
So thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure. And for everyone that has a question, I hope I've been able to impact one way or the other. And some of those questions are quite provoking as well. And I love it. I love it. It gives a new line of thinking. As we answer some of those questions, some new things have started popping up, and I really do appreciate you all for spending your evening and making it work. And thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you guys. Thank you, Adebayo. We'll follow up soon after. Okay, bye for now.
Yeah.